Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Black Blaze Gaming. My name is Dakota, and I am coming at you with a video that has, I guess, been on my mind to make for a few days now, and it's been getting more and more. I've been itching to make this more and more, and I've been trying to put a little bit more work into the production quality of it. That said, you won't be getting my face today, as I just kind of want to focus on the topics at hand and the issues that we're facing with this particular discussion topic. Now, Baldur's Gate 3 has obviously made a bit of a splash in the industry in a lot of ways, considering how it's been received in both a negative sense and in a positive sense. And I wanted to touch on some things. I've seen a lot of videos from other people talking about sort of where the backlash came from and discussions around the backlash, but there's a lot of points that I didn't see people really hitting on that I kind of wanted to take on myself and provide a little bit more of a analysis of where I think this discourse has really kind of gone astray. I've seen of course, this initial tweet from Xalavier Nelson Jr. I don't know much about this person. I know that they're an indie developer. I know I looked into what games they've made. I haven't heard of them prior to this person making this post. Obviously, this tweet is a bit old now, but I think the discussion that has blossomed out of it is really going in very strange directions, and so I think bringing it back to the root a little bit to discuss sort of where I think this tweet went wrong versus where I think it went right might add a little bit more context and understanding to people so that they understand why this tweet kind of took off the way that it did, at least in my opinion. Because there are a lot of people defending the tweet, there are a lot of people trashing the tweet. I've heard reports that there are people harassing Xalavier. Don't ever do that. That's ridiculous. I think this thread he made was in a very, it was in good faith, albeit I think poorly thought out, poorly worded, and I'm not going to be as charitable to everyone in this discussion because I don't think everyone has earned that given their comments in this particular discourse. But first, let's just get into the thread itself to discuss why I think it's not had this sort of impact that I think was intended. Now, I think this thread, as I said, it was done in sort of a good faith perspective. I think that Xalavier wanted to really make something known to try and temper expectations a little bit towards the industry, because I think that the gaming community has become very entitled in a lot of aspects. There are certain expectations that the community has adopted that I don't think are healthy, and I think are self-destructive and put pressure on devs that is kind of undue. But that said, the way that this tweet addresses those, or this thread addresses those issues, doesn't quite hit the mark. So let's get further into that with the first thing I want to address. Now, the first topic I want to discuss about this particular thread and why it's faced so much backlash from the community is the timing. We are in an era where lots of major studios with huge projects have been putting out absolute garbage and have been treating their communities so poorly, treating their fans so poorly, and there's been this sort of disdain and loathing for the people that you make money from, which kind of absurd, but they're also still breaking profit records. So something they're doing is working, but it's not that hard to exploit idiots, frankly. So the timing to me is a bit awkward when you have all these major projects that have been widely panned, are really being hated. Obviously, you have the Diablo 4 fiasco, which, I mean, I don't know how anyone didn't see that coming. Blizzard has a tremendously disgusting track record of late of just being very profit first, not giving a damn about user experience, and instead focusing on user retention, on making essentially a product that is designed to waste as much of your time as possible while draining as much money out of your wallet as possible. That is Blizzard's motto in the modern era. So obviously Diablo 4 was going to be a disaster. Don't know why anybody thought otherwise. That's why I think Starfield is not going to be all that great. Personal opinion. I know. Game's not out yet. I can't criticize it that hard. And then you have Cyberpunk 2077, which disappointed people across the board because it made promises it couldn't keep. And I love that game, and I have loved that game from day one, but I also wasn't stupid enough to buy it on a last-gen console with a game that looks so ridiculously high quality in its graphics fidelity compared to everything else. I mean, there's very few games I can name that are come even close to the graphics landmark that is Cyberpunk 2077. So yeah, buying it on a last-gen console was, in my opinion, not very bright, but also promising it on a last-gen console was really stupid, and placing sort of these absurd timelines on this game was really stupid. And the amount of marketing, like, they could have just cut back the marketing and put more funding into the actual development. It's so stupid. And then you have the Destiny 2 fiasco of recent memory. That's been kind of a mess. But I think even more potent than all of this, I mean, obviously consumers are mad. They're not being treated very well. They're not being respected as a community. I think those are very valid concerns. I think the most important thing about the timing of this thread is the backlash to Elden Ring. Elden Ring is one of the best-selling PC games of all time, or just one of the best-selling games of all time, one of the most popular games of all time. It's in the top 10 most popular Steam games of all time, which it's up there with the likes of like Counter-Strike Global Offensive, which is a free-to-play game, and other major free-to-play games. And it's not free-to-play. That's a huge, huge landmark. And Cyberpunk is up there too. And Cyberpunk also, in my opinion, again, deserves it. But we also had this sort of weird backlash, and this was really bad faith backlash from devs when it came to Elden Ring's release. There was devs trying to bash its UI design or its quest design, and just really weird takes from studios that actively disrespect their fans, actively disrespect their fans' time, and treat them as cash cows rather than people who want to experience something fun and enjoyable and worth their money, worth their time, that sort of thing. So it was just an attempt to sort of try to knock down this successful product that was made with love and passion and care for the community that wanted it. It wasn't made for everyone. It was made for the people who were in its target demographic, people who are familiar with FromSoft games, but also people who just like open world, challenging action combat games. They made it with that target demographic in mind. It was not designed to pander to every fucking demographic they possibly could to milk as much money as they could. They just ended up making money because the product itself is fucking good. So yeah, I think that Xalavier lacked a little bit of insight in realizing that this tweet might not be coming at a very good time in the context of the industry. But then again, how could he have known that it was going to blow up the way that it did? So that moves us on to part 2, which is, I think, the thread's failure to acknowledge the consumer perspective. This entire thread, of course, is written from a developer's point of view, and it lacks the insight into consumer feelings based on recent events. I mean, you have this notion that we shouldn't use it to criticize other games, or we shouldn't use it as a raised standard for RPGs going forward. But we want to do that because the standards have gotten so low. And whoever you want to blame for that, publishers, developers, consumer expectations, whoever you want to blame for all of these lower standards, is irrelevant, because the fact of the matter is the standards have dropped. There are issues with how developers or publishers or whoever is trying to meet player expectations. I think ultimately a lot of the stuff is they're trying to push out something that is acceptable enough to get people to play it and feel guilty that they spent as much money on the game as they did, so that they keep them playing it. So they try to get their money's worth, but it takes them dozens of hours to get their money's worth. I bought Baldur's Gate 3 day one of early access, and I didn't do it because they promised me anything. I did it because I played Divinity Original Sin and Divinity Original Sin 2, and I knew that Larian I've always wanted to make a Dungeons and Dragons game, like officially. I knew that that's what they've always wanted to make, and so I knew that they were going to put their best foot forward and do everything they could to make this game awesome. Plus, a lot of people criticized the game when it first was released in early access as being basically Divinity Original Sin 3 with a new skin. But why would anyone not want that? I loved Original Sin 2 and Original Sin 1. I think they're fucking masterpieces. And to be fair, the first Original Sin game was made with 30 people or something, I heard. I don't know if that's actually true. I know it was a very small studio at the time, and it was crowdfunded. And then the second game was released in early access to get funding. I know all of this stuff for sure. And but those games were just so good, and the scope was still large. But again, these are talented people. These are experienced people, and they built their tech for themselves. Like they know what they're doing. They're not newbies to the industry by any stretch. They've been making games for, I think, over 20 years. They know what they're doing, and I think that's just the company itself. I think the devs they have with them are probably even more experienced than that. So ultimately, I feel like this thread ignores the feelings that consumers have had about where the industry has been going in recent memory, and instead focuses on, oh, look at all the stuff behind the scenes and all that. And I think that's important. Those are important topics to bring up, but it doesn't at any point acknowledge that consumers may have some right to feel the way that they do about the current state of the industry. Now I want to move on into my third point on this topic. This has been touched on a lot by other content creators, but I think there's some points that have been missed, and I do think it is still very, very relevant to this particular video and this topic in general, and that is the wording of the tweets. This whole thread reads like a long list of excuses from like a corporate apology letter, which, by the way, is another thing we've seen a whole lot of from big studios lately in response to their games being poorly received, or their updates being poorly received, since live service is the name of the game lately, and a lot of companies, it's still kind of a new breed, and we don't really have a good master plan as to how to approach these in different genres and stuff. But it does read like just excuses and not actually, and again, this is where that failing to acknowledge the consumer perspective comes into play. It's just like these are dev things. And while I personally have worked in software development, and I've worked in programming and 3D art and game art and things like that, game design, these are things that I understand where he's coming from, and even from the business side of things, I understand where he's coming from. But it's a very strange set of things to acknowledge within the context of the industry itself. And specifically the wording of talking about how wanting to push back against players being excited about Baldur's Gate 3 and wanting to use it to apply criticism to other games, or use it as a raised standard for RPGs. I mean, obviously Sven had a great response to this about how there's not really standards, because they're always changing. They change so rapidly, and there's so many different niches and stuff with different games and genres and everything that it's really kind of, it's impossible to put a pin on, because you can get as much enjoyment out of an indie developed 2D platformer that's, pixel art, as you would something like Baldur's Gate. You can get an equivalent amount of enjoyment out of both, even though they take completely different sets of resources to make, and they appeal to completely separate demographics. Well, not completely separate. There's going to be overlap, but you know what I mean. It's sort of these raised standards discussions are really strange in the world of gaming. But it also doesn't really acknowledge that humans by nature have to compare things. It's how our brains function. It's a survival instinct. We've always compared things. Taking in new information is difficult, and we need to have other information to compare to so we can make judgments about things. It's important to have these pieces to the puzzle, and the more pieces we have, the better. I mean, can you hold every game to the same standard as Baldur's Gate 3? No, and I don't think anybody's really having that sentiment. I don't think that people are expecting indie developers like Xalavier to have these kinds of this level of polish and scope in their games. We're talking about the AAA studios who have all this funding and have all these resources and employees and everything and experience, who are delivering tripe, basically garbage. They're throwing and then they throw each other under the bus whenever a successful game comes out, throw each other under the bus whenever something flops. I mean, look at Pete Hines and his disgusting comments about the Xbox team's efforts on Redfall, and said, well, I think the Xbox team did a better job working with Starfield than they did with Redfall. Why the fuck would you throw them under the bus like that? What's wrong with you? If I was part of that Xbox team, I'd be pissed. If I was part of the Redfall team at Arcane, I'd be pissed. That's disgusting. That's a horrible thing. But Pete Hines has no excuse. He's a business person who is trying to make money making games, not trying to make games because that's what he loves to do. He's a giant snake in the grass who has lied and cheated and manipulated. And I don't know why anybody has any respect for him. Like, he's successful, but lots of shitty people are successful. I want to move on to part 4 of my my thoughts on this, and this is sort of a bigger chunk, but I think this entire thread is missing a lot of industry context, and it's bordering on misinformation with some of the things that are said in this thread, and so I'll be going over points from my previous parts on this because it is sort of a more general look at things, but there's also some specifics I want to delve into here. The thread mentions that the dev cycle stretches back to 2017, so it's a 6-year dev cycle, which a lot of major recent games have been a 6-year dev cycle, because the studios have the funding to work on a game that long without seeing profit. It mentions 2 massive games and their definitive editions worth of tech and institutional knowledge to draw from. Again, not an uncommon thing in the AAA space. The weird thing about this thread is that it talks about the development of mega games, which is a term I've never heard before, mega games. But that's the thing. Games are increasing in scope. I totally agree with that. That's totally a fair thing to say. But if you're saying that as part of your context for why Baldur's Gate 3's development is somehow an anomaly, then we're going to be comparing it to other big studios, and all these excuses that are being thrown into this thread are essentially irrelevant, and they're bullshit. If you're talking about in an indie space, sure, but you're not. You're talking about mega games and the way that they're developed, and trying to say that Larian is somehow an anomaly with somehow more resources and power than other devs in the space. Ridiculous. What an absurd claim. How did you not think about that beforehand? So then he goes on to say, super successful early access period lasting 3 years, providing crucial community feedback, bug hunting, and cash flow. Right. But also, they don't have that big of a QA team with 430 devs or whatever I think is under the umbrella of the Larian company, they don't have that big of a QA team, and they're releasing on multiple platforms. So they have to test against multiple configurations, and especially PC, which is obviously, everyone knows, the most difficult platform to develop for because of the variables involved with the hardware and software that could be installed on the target platform. There are so many things that can get in the way of a game's functionality. I mean, look at something like Skyrim, which I think it was Special Edition, that had a bug with a Windows audio driver that would cause it to not launch. There are so many variables, so many things that seem benign, but can be crippling in the function of a game, or any software for that matter. And again, with the scope getting as large as it has, there's more variables in the game itself that can be fucked up by the target platform. So having a team of developers that's about 400 people, you don't have a lot of QA. So releasing in early access is a very valid strategy in the modern era in order to get that sort of feedback and user experience, especially because users are not going to be playing the game in the way that you expect them to in a lot of cases. Users are such a weird group of people. And Baldur's Gate 3 is far from the only game in recent memory that has released in early access ahead of its launch. And funny enough, a lot of these major fucking projects that have come out, these mega games, have been releasing in essentially an early access state because they're so unfinished and so broken. So yeah, they released in early access. I don't see how that's relevant to this particular conversation. And super successful, well, what do you mark as being a super successful early access period? Because I heard that early access, they sold about 1.5 million copies. Now, I don't know when that number was recorded. I don't know if that's right up to release, or before they announced that if you had early access, if you bought early access, that you got the deluxe edition for free. Because that's going to push some more units, by the way. Again, this is missing information and context that makes it seem like this thread might be in bad faith or just poorly researched. And then, of course, as I said, he goes on to list that there's over 400 developers in 7 different offices around the world, not including outsourcing partners. But again, if you're comparing that to the dev cycle of other mega games, that is not a huge number of developers. You look at companies like Bungie, who's working on Destiny 2 and have been making gigantically stupid decisions that have pissed off fans left and right and have had an open disrespect for their fans for years now, and loaded their game with microtransactions and loaded their game with problems that people keep complaining about and aren't getting fixed, and then making excuses that we don't have enough resources. They have over 1,500 employees. They're triple the size of Larian. How do you excuse that? And then you look at Diablo, and how are you not calling Diablo an anomaly as far as its development cycle? It's been in development for fucking 6 years. It has over 8,500 employees. It's gigantic. It's way bigger than Larian is. By no stretch can you even compare the two. But the scope of Baldur's Gate 3 is, I would say, nearly on par with Diablo 4, probably more so. It's a gigantic game with a ton to do, and a ton of player freedom and choice, and it's wonderful, and it's so good, and it's complete on release, and isn't loaded with microtransactions and disrespect for the consumer like Diablo 4 is. And on top of that, you talk about the history of the previous games and tech and institutional knowledge that Larian has. They have 2 games worth of tech. What does Blizzard have? Look at Diablo 4. It's the 4th game in the franchise. Not the 3rd one they've made, but the 4th one. So they have 3 games of institutional tech and knowledge behind them. They have a ton of lore to pull from, so it's not even like that much of a writing problem either. You can't, like, how are you explaining all of this? These holes in your own narrative. This is why people are frustrated, because you failed to mention the major players that they're up against. There are so many other devs with way more funding and way more behind them than Larian has, but a lot less passion and love. And whether it's the devs or whether it's the publishers, that's up to you to figure out. I don't really know, because in certain cases, I think, like Cyberpunk, was crippled by its marketing team and its publishing team, because CD Projekt Red is managed by a board called CD Projekt. They are a bunch of businessmen. They're not game developers. They're not here to make a beloved, albeit kind of cult following tabletop game into a successful AAA RPG video game. They're trying to make money. And so they put stupid expectations on the devs. But then you look at like Blizzard, who's sold their souls to Activision, a notoriously widely hated company, but successful. Or BioWare, who, while they're around the same size as Larian, sold to EA years ago, and the owners just took the money and ran, as far as I'm aware. The same thing that happened to Rareware. And what? EA, how big is EA? You're really going to try to compare Larian's resources to EA? Are you kidding me? Are you going to try to compare Larian's resources to all these devs that are owned by Microsoft, who have way more backlog of games that they've made in comparison to Larian, even before they were bought by Microsoft and turned into a soulless, fucking passionless cash cow? And then you talk about the license, the brand, and the world of one of the largest entertainment IPs in the world, Dungeons & Dragons, at the apex of its popularity with the rise of the actual play movement and a movie. Okay, I'd like to see your sources on that. How is D&D one of the largest entertainment IPs in the world? How are they really in the public eye right now? They had a movie recently, but I don't know anybody who's seen it. And I know a lot of people who play Baldur's Gate 3 and haven't seen this new movie. And you have no proof that there's any overlap either between people who saw this movie and got excited about Dungeons & Dragons and then went to play Baldur's Gate 3. Baldur's Gate 3 doesn't even have the Dungeons & Dragons name anywhere in its title. A lot of people don't even realize that it has anything to do with Dungeons & Dragons. And what? They didn't get paid by Wizards of the Coast to make Baldur's Gate 3. They had to buy the license. They had to pay for the license out of pocket. That's on them. And then you look at like largest entertainment IPs in the world. By what metric? I mean, no, I'm not saying that they're small. They've been around a long time. They've got a lot of history and lore to pull from and all this sort of thing. But they're not even in the top 25 most valuable media IPs in the world right now. They're eclipsed by fucking James Bond and Yu-Gi-Oh! And Peanuts and Toy Story. And Fist of the North Star eclipses Dungeons and Dragons. You're really going to try and tell me that they have some big weight behind them because of the name? Or do you mean Baldur's Gate as a name? Because the last Baldur's Gate game came out in 2004. And this doesn't even take into account the fact that there are so many people who are pissed off that this Baldur's Gate game that is a sequel to the previous games isn't being made by the original developers, BioWare, and isn't real-time combat like the original game. So it doesn't feel like a real sequel to them. And I think on some level, although I don't have the numbers on this, on some level that may have hurt their numbers. So by what metric can you claim that this is somehow an anomaly in terms of the popularity of the IP? Because it's not there. Again, this missing context makes it feel like this thread is taken in bad faith. And again, a lot of devs are taking it in a sense of like, well, we could use this to cover our asses for all the garbage we've shoveled people in the past decade. Compare it to Harry Potter. Harry Potter is in I think the top 10 most valuable media franchises in the world, in the history of our species. They had a game earlier this year that is only one slot higher in popularity than Baldur's Gate 3. So your metrics don't add up. They don't make Baldur's Gate 3 an anomaly because of the resources behind it. They make it an anomaly because the people that made it actually give a damn. So if you're trying to say that we shouldn't expect developers to give a damn, well, I don't have anything to say to you. I don't think you should be making games if you really believe that consumers shouldn't expect developers to make a product worth their goddamn money and time. That's an absolutely disgusting take. And you should be ashamed of yourself if that's how you truly feel. But it might not be. And I personally don't think it is. I think that you actually meant to temper expectations in a good way to prevent, essentially Baldur's Gate 3 being weaponized against other developers. But some of these developers, I don't know who exactly you're trying to defend. I mean, you're talking about mega games, so I assume you're trying to defend the AAA scene. Some of these developers don't deserve to be shielded from that kind of criticism. I mean, nobody is above criticism. Nobody should ever be held above criticism. And ultimately, a game like Baldur's Gate 3 should be lighting a fire under the asses of devs like Bungie and Blizzard and Obsidian and Bethesda and all these shitty companies that have done a really shitty things in recent memory. And then to try and say, on top of that in an era of mega games, Baldur's Gate 3 is one of the largest attempted, built by a specialized group of people using mature tech specially built to make this specific game, reinforced by invaluable mass player feedback and market validation ahead of its launch. All things that are not anomalies in the industry by any metric. And you have offered us literally no proof of your claims. And again, lacked the context of the industry, consumer feedback, and made yourself look out of touch with the gaming community, which just proves the point the gaming community is trying to make, that developers seem to be out of touch with what the consumer really wants. And again, this goes back to the initial backlash to Elden Ring, where everyone was saying, this is really what players want? Yes, obviously. That's why it's one of the most popular games of all time. Are you out of your mind? This is like basic shit. How do you not understand the very simple concept that when something is popular that kind of came out of nowhere, there's probably a reason for it? I mean, you look at something like Hogwarts Legacy, and you can definitely explain why that game got way more love than any previous Harry Potter game in the history of the industry, and it has less to do with the IP, less to do with the developer, and a lot more to do with the fact that it became a controversy. In that case, there was this huge controversy around it because J.K. Rowling's a giant fucking chode. But the developers behind Hogwarts Legacy don't seem like bad people, and they seem like they wanted to make something that they wanted to see, that they wanted to play themselves, something that they thought would be really good. And it was well received and well loved. And was it the most amazing, groundbreaking, innovative game of all time? Not from what I've heard. I haven't played it myself, but it was still beloved. People still play it. People love that game. And I think that's because it was made with passion. And I think it had more popularity because of the controversy around it. Baldur's Gate 3 has more popularity partially because of the controversy around it, and partially because the devs give a damn. And we don't see enough of that anymore. So then when you look at the final tweet in this thread, I mean, granted, he did follow up later, a week later with another response, but the final tweet in the original thread was, if you shout that every RPG should be like this going forward, you have no excuse. Then you've not just missed the point, you've created the expectations and conditions to ensure your favorite creators may never be able to give you the thing you love ever again. That is a very valid point used in the wrong context. Because absolutely, consumers setting higher expectations than are really reasonable or realistic can absolutely kill development cycles and kill developers and kill popular games that could be way better than they are. Those sort of expectations can be really unrealistic. But the context is wrong. Because these other AAA studios absolutely have zero excuse. And I understand, again, the whole publisher argument. Some of these companies are under publishers that do terrible things to the devs, don't give a damn about the consumer. They just want to milk you for all you're worth, and they see a development studio as a cash cow for themselves. They don't see it as a group of people working together to create an artistic vision that can be good on its own merits rather than being a gambling simulator. But again, how many of these studios sold out to a publisher when Larian didn't? When Larian decided to attempt to be funded by the people who wanted to play the games rather than be funded by people who wanted to make money from people playing the game. That's the difference. That's the context you're missing. And that's why I think, to a certain extent, you deserve the level of criticism you've received for the kinds of things you've said in response to this game coming out. This goes out to all the devs who have come out with backlash against Baldur's Gate 3's success and the community's response to wanting more games to be like this. Again, I don't think there's any reason to go around harassing devs on Twitter or any other space to try and, shame them or make them feel bad, unless they've genuinely done something wrong. Blizzard. Which, again, I honestly... That's a whole other can of worms. Like, Blizzard is a whole other can of worms. I don't think the company should be afloat anymore. I don't think anybody worth their salt is even still working for Blizzard at this point. After all the shit they pulled and covered up and pushed under the rug and all the settlements they made and lawsuits they lost because of all the shitty things they were doing, and they are still in operation and still breaking profit records. I don't think they have an excuse. I don't think they should be shielded from any sort of criticism. And I'm sorry, but if you're a dev who is a professional in the industry and you're worried about bad criticism, you don't belong in the industry. Frankly, you're an artist. It is your job to take criticism. And I think there are criticisms that will come at you that are in bad faith, and those people should absolutely not be coming at you with that. But it is inevitable. And to come out here and try to complain about it and bitch and moan like, oh, the little fucking independent individual little consumer is bullying the great big corporation. You can jump up your own ass with that shit. You can eat shit and live, frankly, because you have no leg to stand on. Consumers can have absolutely unrealistic expectations because consumers don't have any idea how fucking game design works most of the time. But to try and say that Baldur's Gate 3 is somehow an anomaly or somehow an outlier as far as dev cycles go is ridiculous. It's a poorly researched and completely unbacked statement to make. So when you look at how this entire conversation has gone so goddamn poorly ever since that thread came out, this is why. This is the reason. The missing context, the lack of attention to consumer wishes and consumer feedback, the poor wording, the accusatory nature of all of it. It just seems like it was written by a person who doesn't give a fuck about what the consumer actually thinks or just doesn't get it. I don't believe that's the case. I think the person who made this thread genuinely wanted to help devs against some of the unfair criticisms that are leveraged against them, but didn't think through the thread at all ahead of posting it. And so when you look at other things like Destin from IGN and his discussion about the video, about the thread in his video, and then people trying to say there was that other former journalist that tried to clap back and was absolutely up his own ass, and I'll probably make another video about that guy specifically because holy fuck, that was actually despicable, and I definitely want to punch that guy around verbally, of course, for his mistakes. Don't go after Xalavier if you're watching this video. I don't think Xalavier did any of this in bad faith, but it was very poorly worded, very poorly thought out, and was bound to create a controversy. I don't know how you can be on the internet as long as this person appears to have been and not understand the impact of a thread like this, as well as being in the industry of game development and not understand how a thread like this would cause controversy. But it's an error. It's a mistake. It's not that the person came out with malicious intent, unlike some of the other devs that I could mention. So looking back on all of this drama and controversy, people trying to say that Destin from IGN came out and tried to target harassment at specific developers, when really he was talking about an article that was made about this thread and about other devs retweeting the thread with their own kind of shitty comments on the topic. That article was the problem more than anything. Why are people not focusing on the article? Why aren't they focusing? Why are they focusing instead on Destin's actually genuinely honest, earnest, and positive video, speaking up for a voice that has been silenced and hushed and disregarded so frequently in the past few years that everyone saw it as a breath of fresh air? How can you look at a company like IGN that has been widely mocked and dissed and punched at, been the community's punching bag for years now because of their atrocious takes, their abysmal attempts at journalism, and possibly see that the community feedback to this is like, wow, this is the best video they put out in years, and be like, oh, the consumers are wrong. Oh, Destin is wrong. Oh, they're all just idiots. It's not my problem. It's their problem. They're all just idiots. How can anyone possibly look at this whole situation and not realize that that's an absurd take? But that's about all for me. I've been ranting for a very long time now. My voice is getting hoarse because I got very passionate towards the end there. But frankly, I hope ultimately at the end of the day to inspire people to think a little bit more critically about these things, to realize that when you make a mistake, you've made a mistake and you deserve criticism for it. You don't deserve to be harassed. You don't deserve to be bullied or insulted personally. But you do need to hear the feedback and criticism, and to make a thread where you mention how valuable the consumer feedback has been to the development of Baldur's Gate 3, but also not be willing to take any of the criticism from consumers, any feedback from people who are saying that your take is completely atrocious. That's ironic, and that's hilarious to me. That you basically are you're basically people who retweet this sort of thing, this thread, and without realizing the implications of retweeting something like that and then not taking criticism. That's laughable. This is why you're a joke. I'm looking at you, Bungie. I'm looking at you, Blizzard. I'm looking at you, Obsidian, and all the ZeniMax umbrella people who moved over to fucking Microsoft. I'm looking at all of you, and I'm laughing, and we all are, and we all should be. And I hope Starfield flops. Genuinely, I hope Starfield flops. Bethesda hasn't done anything right in the past fucking since before Fallout 4, I think. So. That's all from me. Thank you so much for watching. I hope I didn't make you angrier. I hope that my frustration and my anger can be sort of an outlet for you, so you can have someone who gets it, who understands, who can feel for you, and you can relate to, and you don't use this as a platform to jump on and pile on people who don't deserve it. Instead, look at this video as a way to just hear your voice, but through a really nice microphone. Sorry, I'm really in love with the new microphone I got. Look at this video as someone saying the words for you, so you don't have to. So you don't have to go through and start bullying and insulting people who don't deserve it. And I definitely said some things in this video that probably weren't worded well, probably come across more aggressive than I intend for them to come off. But unlike some of the devs in the industry, I'll take the criticism for it, and I'll learn, and I'll grow. And you can come and see that in our next video. Thanks for watching.